Plutarch's Lives, Essential Selections, the greatest Greek and Roman leaders on power, virtue, strategy, and legacy. Ancient History and Philosophy for Modern Men, Leaders, and Builders by Aurelian Hart. Introduction. The clock on the wall says it is 9:14 p.m. The cleaning crew has already finished the hallway, and the hum of the vacuum has been replaced by a silence that feels heavy enough to crush a man. You are sitting at a desk made of reclaimed oak and polished steel. It is a beautiful desk, the kind of desk a successful person owns. On the corner of it sits a small piece of clear plastic. It is an award. It says Manager of the Year. You should feel proud. You should feel like you have made it. Instead, your chest feels tight. There is a dull ache behind your eyes that no amount of expensive coffee can touch. You just spent the last 4 hours looking at a spreadsheet of names. Beside those names are numbers, salaries, health plan costs, bonus structures. Your job, the one you work 60-hour weeks to get, is to decide which of those names will no longer have a job by Monday morning. Your phone buzzes. It is a text from your wife. There is a picture of your son, Leo, fast asleep with a book on his chest. The caption says, "He waited until 8:30. He really wanted to show you his drawing." A wave of something sharp and cold hits your stomach. You realize that you are winning a game that you aren't even sure you want to play anymore. You are competent. You are fast. You are high-performing. But as you look at that plastic award, you realize it doesn't mean anything. You are a reactive manager. You spend your days putting out fires that other people started. You spend your nights worrying about metrics while your son grows up in the other room. You have all the tools of modern success, the apps, the hacks, the network, but you have no center. You are a ship with a powerful engine but no rudder, tossing around in a storm of noise. This feeling of being hollowed out by success is the great secret of the modern leader. We have more information than any humans in history, yet we feel less wise. We have more productivity tips than we can count, yet we feel more exhausted. We are taught how to be effective, but we are never taught how to be virtuous. We are told how to get power, but we are never told how to keep our souls once we have it. The problem of the modern noise. We live in an age of the quick fix. If you are stressed, there is an app for that. If your team is failing, there is a weekend seminar for that. If you want to be a better leader, there is a listicle with 7 hacks that promise to change your life in 5 minutes. But leadership is not a hack. Character is not something you can download. The world you navigate every day is volatile. It is noisy. Markets shift in an afternoon. A single tweet can destroy a company's reputation. Your rivals are always awake, always grinding, always looking for a way to move faster than you. It is easy to believe that the only way to survive is to be more ruthless, more transactional, and more reactive. You start to see your employees as resources to be managed. You start to see your family as a commitment to be scheduled. You start to see yourself as a machine that just needs the right oil to keep running. This is the path to the hollow win. It is the path where you end up with the corner office and the big house, but you realize you have become a person you don't actually like. You realize that in your quest to build an empire, you forgot to build a man. The frustration you feel right now is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of your conscience trying to wake you up. It is the realization that the hacks have reached their limit. You don't need more information. You need a philosophy. You don't need a better calendar. You need a better mirror. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a man named Plutarch sat in a small town in Greece and watched the world change. The old Greek ways were fading, and the Roman Empire was at its peak. He saw young men who were incredibly talented but deeply confused. They were surrounded by wealth and power, yet they were losing their moral compass. They were becoming hollowed out by their own success. Plutarch was not just a historian. He was a priest at the Oracle of Delphi and a local judge. He was a man who cared about how people lived. He believed that the best way to teach a man how to be great was not to give him a list of rules, but to show him a life. He began to write a series of books called The Parallel Lives. He would take one great Greek leader and one great Roman leader and stand them side by side. He wasn't interested in just the dates of their battles or the size of their kingdoms. He was looking for the small signs. He wanted to know, how did this man handle a bribe? How did he treat his friends when he was at the top? How did he handle a crushing defeat? Plutarch called history a mirror. He believed that by looking at the lives of the greats, we could see our own reflections more clearly. We could see where we are being cowardly when we think we are being strategic. We could see where we are being arrogant when we think we are being confident. This book is not a dry history lesson. It is a manual for the moral gymnasium. It is a training ground for your character. For centuries, the most powerful men in history used Plutarch's lives as their secret weapon. Alexander Hamilton carried them in his pocket during the American Revolution. Napoleon studied them to understand how to move an army. Ralph Waldo Emerson called them a library for all time. These men didn't read Plutarch to pass a test. They read him to find out who they were supposed to be. They knew that the struggles of a Roman general in 50 BC are the exact same struggles of a VP of product in a modern firm. The technology changes, but the human heart does not. The noise changes, but the need for a center remains. The story of Marcus Thorne. To understand how these ancient lessons apply to your life today, we are going to follow a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus is 38 years old. He is the VP of product at a mid-sized fintech firm in Austin, Texas. On paper, Marcus is the definition of a winner. He has the glass-walled corner office. He has a beautiful wife named Sarah and 2 kids, Leo and Maya. He has a Peloton bike in his garage where he spends every morning at 5 a.m. trying to outrun the stress that feels like a physical weight on his shoulders. But Marcus is struggling. He is a reactive manager. He feels like a high-end firefighter. He wakes up to 50 Slack messages and spends his entire day responding to other people's priorities. His team respects his intelligence, but they don't really trust him. They see him as transactional, someone who will support them as long as the numbers are good, but who will drop them the moment the wind shifts. Marcus is starting to feel like a transactional father and husband too. When he is at home, he is still looking at his phone. When his wife talks to him, he is calculating risk-benefit ratios for his next product launch. He is cynical. He believes that nice guys finish last, and that the only way to stay on top is to be faster and more ruthless than the person in the next office. One night, after a particularly brutal day of politics at the office, Marcus finds himself in his backyard. The house is quiet. He is sitting on a lawn chair, looking at the stars, feeling completely empty. He realizes that if he died tomorrow, his company would replace him in a week, and his kids would remember him as the man who was always looking at a screen. He finds an old, dusty book in his grandfather's collection. It is a copy of Plutarch's Lives. He starts to read, and for the first time in years, he feels like someone is speaking directly to his soul. He sees his own ambition in the story of Julius Caesar. He sees his own fear in the story of Cicero. He sees a way out of the noise in the story of Lycurgus. Through this book, we will watch Marcus as he tries to apply these ancient principles to his modern world. We will see him fail. We will see him struggle. And eventually, we will see him transform. The transformation promise. By the time you finish this book, you will no longer be a reactive manager. You will be a virtuous architect. What is the difference? A reactive manager is a slave to the moment. He is swayed by public opinion, paralyzed by the fear of failure, and exhausted by the pursuit of short-term gains. He has reputation, but he has no character. A virtuous architect is someone who builds his life and his career on a foundation of proven principles. He operates from a grounded center. He has the strategic patience of a Roman general. He views every decision, from a boardroom negotiation to a conversation with his child, through the lens of long-term legacy and ethical excellence. You will learn how to build a disciplined mind using the Spartan operating system to cut through the digital noise and regain your focus. Master strategic patience, learning when to delay, like Fabius Maximus, to win a war that everyone else is losing. Navigate power without losing your soul, using the Solonic balance to handle rivals and office politics with integrity. Turn failure into fuel, seeing how the greats used catastrophic setbacks to build their greatest triumphs, create a lasting legacy, moving beyond the fiscal quarter mindset to build something that actually lasts. The roadmap ahead. We are going to travel through the most critical moments of Western history to find the tools you need for your modern life. We will begin with the 3 pillars of the disciplined mind, looking at how Lycurgus of Sparta turned a chaotic city into the most disciplined force on earth. You will see how Marcus Thorne tries to implement these no-phone routines to reclaim his own attention. From there, we will explore power and moderation through the life of Solon of Athens. You will learn why the wisest leaders often refuse absolute power, and how that refusal actually makes them more powerful in the long run. We will dive into long-range strategy with Themistocles, the man who saved Western civilization by seeing a threat 10 years before anyone else did. You will see how this long-game thinking can help you build a moat around your career and your company. We will face the darkest hour with Pericles, learning how to maintain your dignity and your team's morale when a literal or figurative plague hits your organization. But we will also look at the warnings. We will study the fall of the brilliant narcissist through Alcibiades and the arrogance of excellence through Coriolanus. These stories will serve as the guardrails for your own ambition, showing you where talent without character leads. We will meet Alexander the Great to learn the psychology of the impossible win, and Julius Caesar to understand the point of no return. We will see the tragedy of Pompey, who relied too much on his past reputation, and the courage of Cicero, who proved that words could be more powerful than swords. We will watch Mark Antony lose everything to distraction, and Brutus struggle with the weight of a heavy conscience. We will learn the danger of the Pyrrhic victory, winning the battle but losing the war, and the ultimate competitive advantage of integrity through Aristides the Just. Finally, we will look at how to handle the self-made man's greatest trap, power, through the lives of Marius and Sulla, and how to escape the comparison trap that destroyed Crassus. We will end with the unshakable leader, Phocion, who valued truth over popularity and left a legacy that no amount of money could buy. The journey from reactive manager to virtuous architect is not an easy one. It requires you to look in the mirror and be honest about what you see. It requires you to trade the quick hack for the long discipline. But the reward is a life of arete, a Greek word that means excellence or virtue. It is the feeling of being the same man in the dark that you are in the light. It is the feeling of coming home at the end of the day, looking at your children, and knowing that the man they see is a man worth following. The ancients are waiting. The moral gymnasium is open. Chapter 1. 3 Pillars of the Disciplined Mind. If you visit the valley of the Eurotas River today, you will find a quiet Greek town called Sparta. It is surrounded by olive trees and the jagged peaks of the Taygetus Mountains. It is a peaceful place where tourists eat feta cheese and drink cold coffee under the sun. There are no great walls or towering ruins. The earth has swallowed almost everything. But 2,800 years ago, this valley was the most feared place on earth. It didn't have stone walls because the leader of the city, a man named Lycurgus, believed that a city protected by brick was a city inhabited by cowards. He wanted a wall of men. He wanted a society where every citizen was a living weapon, not just in war, but in character. Before Lycurgus, Sparta was a mess. It was a place of lacked rule and bad rule. The rich were too rich and the poor were starving. People fought in the streets. It was noisy, chaotic, and failing. Lycurgus left the city to travel the world, studying the laws of other lands. When he returned, he didn't just bring back new rules. He brought back a new way of being human. He called his plan the Great Retra. He didn't start with the economy or the military. He started with the mind. He knew that if you could not control yourself, you could never hope to control a city or an army. This is where the first pillar of the disciplined mind was born, the mastery of one's own response. One afternoon, the wealthy men of Sparta gathered to protest Lycurgus's new laws. They hated that he was making them live simply. The crowd turned into a mob. They began throwing stones. Lycurgus, seeing the danger, ran toward a nearby temple. A young man named Alcander, fast and full of rage, chased him down. As Lycurgus turned his head, Alcander struck him in the face with a thick stick. The blow was so hard, it knocked out one of Lycurgus's eyes. Imagine the scene. The leader of the city is bleeding, his face mangled, standing before a crowd that just moments ago was screaming for blood. Most leaders would have called for the guards. They would have had Alcander killed on the spot. But Lycurgus did something that changed history. He stood there, showed the crowd his ruined face, and said nothing. The crowd went silent. The sight of their leader, calm and bleeding, made them ashamed. They handed Alcander over to Lycurgus to be punished. Lycurgus took the boy home, but he didn't put him in chains. He didn't beat him. He simply made Alcander his personal assistant for the day. He forced the young man to watch how a leader lived. Alcander saw Lycurgus wake up early, eat simple food, work hard, and speak with kindness to everyone he met. He saw a man who had every reason to be angry, but chose to be steady. By the end of the day, Alcander was a different person. He didn't just respect Lycurgus, he wanted to be like him. Lycurgus didn't just win a fight. He proved that the greatest power a leader has is the ability to stay calm when the world is on fire. The first pillar, mastery of response. This story tells us something vital about what Plutarch called the moral gymnasium. We often think of discipline as something we use to get things done, like finishing a report or hitting the gym. But for the greats of history, discipline was an internal wall. It was the ability to put a gap between what happens to you and how you act. In Austin, Texas, Marcus Thorne was struggling with this very thing. It was 5:15 a.m. The air in his home gym was cool, and the only sound was the hum of his Peloton bike. Usually, Marcus would be pedaling hard, but his eyes were glued to the screen of his phone, which sat on the handlebars. A Slack message had come in from his CEO at 11:30 p.m. the night before. Then a flurry of emails followed at 4 a.m. His heart was racing, but not from the exercise. It was racing from a cocktail of cortisol and resentment. He felt like a dog on a leash, getting jerked every time a notification popped up. Marcus was a VP of product at a successful firm, but he felt like a fraud. He was successful because he was fast. He responded to every fire. He jumped at every demand. But looking at his reflection in the dark window of his gym, he didn't see a leader. He saw a man who was reactive. He was the manager of the year. Yet he couldn't even go 20 minutes without checking a device that made him feel small. He remembered the book his grandfather had left him, the dusty copy of Plutarch's Lives. He had started reading the section on Lycurgus the night before. He thought about the eye. He thought about how Lycurgus didn't let the injury dictate his character. Marcus reached out and did something that felt like cutting off a limb. He turned the phone off and put it in a drawer across the room. The silence was deafening. For the first few minutes, he felt an itch in his brain. He kept imagining the emails piling up. He felt the comparison trap creeping in, thinking about his rivals, who were probably already at their desks, winning the morning. But as he kept pedaling, the noise started to fade. He began to realize that his leadership had become nothing more than a series of knee-jerk reactions. He was a slave to the urgent because he had no internal wall. This is the first pillar, the internal operating system. Before you can lead a team, you must lead your own nervous system. You must decide that your peace of mind is not for sale. The second pillar, purpose over pleasure. While Lycurgus built the foundation of Sparta, another young man, centuries later, would take those lessons to the edge of the known world. Alexander the Great was not born into a simple life. He was a prince. He could have had anything he wanted. He could have spent his days eating honey cakes and lounging on purple cushions. But Alexander was a student of Aristotle. He was raised on the idea that a king is only a king if he is more disciplined than his subjects. There is a famous story from Alexander's long march across Asia. His army was exhausted. They were deep in the desert, and the sun was baking the life out of the men. Everyone was out of water. A few soldiers managed to find a tiny bit of water in a dry gully. They scooped it into a helmet and brought it to Alexander, thinking they were doing him a great favor. Alexander looked at his men. He saw their cracked lips and their sunken eyes. He took the helmet, thanked the soldiers, and then poured the water onto the sand. He showed them that his physical needs were secondary to his purpose. By pouring that water out, he gave his men something better than a drink. He gave them a reason to keep walking. He proved that he wasn't just their boss, he was their brother in the struggle. Alexander's discipline wasn't about being a tough guy. It was about efficiency. He famously refused to eat gourmet meals while on a campaign. When a princess once sent him a group of master chefs to prepare his food, he sent them back. He told her that he already had the best appetizers in the world, a night march to give him a hunger for breakfast, and a light breakfast to give him a hunger for dinner. He viewed luxury as a trap. He knew that comfort makes the mind soft. If you are used to the finest wine and the softest bed, you become a prisoner to those things. You start making decisions based on what will keep you comfortable rather than what will make you great. This leads us to the second pillar, the rejection of luxury. In the modern world, this doesn't mean you have to sleep on the floor or eat plain bread. It means you must be anti-fragile. You must ensure that your happiness is not tied to things you can lose. If you need a Manager of the Year plaque to feel successful, you are weak. If you need a corner office to feel powerful, you are vulnerable. The disciplined mind finds its reward in the work itself, not the perks that come with it. The third pillar, the wall of men. The final pillar of the disciplined mind is the most difficult to build. It is the transition from reputation to character. Plutarch spent his life studying the difference between these two things. Reputation is what people think of you. It is the Manager of the Year plaque on Marcus's wall. It is the likes on a LinkedIn post. It is a fragile thing, built by others and easily destroyed by them. Character, however, is what you are in the dark. It is the wall of men, like Lycurgus talked about. It is the internal strength that stays standing even when the crowd is booing you. Lycurgus lived this to the very end. After his laws had been in place for many years, Sparta had become the most stable and powerful city in Greece. But Lycurgus was worried. He was afraid that as soon as he died, the people would change the laws and go back to their old, lazy ways. He called a meeting of the citizens. He told them he had to take one last trip to the oracle at Delphi to ask for advice. He made every citizen, from the kings to the soldiers, take a solemn oath. They swore that they would not change a single law until he returned. Then Lycurgus left Sparta. He traveled to the oracle, where he was told that his laws were perfect and would make the city famous. But he didn't go back to Sparta. He realized that if he never returned, the Spartans would have to keep their oath forever. He decided to end his life by refusing to eat. He died in a foreign land, alone, for the sake of his city's future. He sacrificed his own life to ensure that his wall of men would never crumble. He didn't care if people remembered his name or gave him a statue. He cared about the legacy of the discipline he had built. He moved beyond the transactional life, the life of what's in it for me, and entered the transformational life. Marcus's first step back, in the quiet backyard of his home in Austin, Marcus Thorne sat on a stone bench. It was 6:00 a.m. He hadn't checked his phone in 45 minutes. The initial anxiety had passed. He thought about his team at the office. He realized that for the last 2 years, he had been leading them like a reactive manager. When they made a mistake, he got angry because it made him look bad. When they succeeded, he was happy because it made him look good. He was living for his reputation. He was a slave to the Alcander inside him, the one who wanted to strike out when things didn't go his way. He looked at the trees in his yard. He thought about his children, Leo and Maya, who would be waking up soon. He realized that they were watching him, just as Alcander had watched Lycurgus. They weren't learning from his success. They were learning from his reactions. If he was always stressed, they would learn that the world is a scary place. If he was always on his phone, they would learn that they were less important than a screen. Marcus stood up. He felt a weight on his shoulders, but it wasn't the heavy, crushing weight of stress. It was the weight of the laurel, the dignity of responsibility. He wasn't going to go into the office today to put out fires. He was going to go in to build a wall of men. He would start by listening to his junior engineers, instead of talking over them. He would start by taking the blame for the security breach instead of passing it to the IT department. He would start by being the most disciplined person in the room, not the loudest. Building your own operating system. The lesson of Lycurgus and Alexander is that discipline is not a punishment. It is a liberation. A person who cannot control their temper is a slave to whoever can make them angry. A person who cannot control their appetite is a slave to their body. A person who cannot control their focus is a slave to every notification and distraction that comes their way. To build a disciplined mind, you must focus on 3 daily practices. The pause. When something goes wrong, an angry email, a missed deadline, a rude comment, do not react. Imagine Lycurgus standing there, bleeding from his eye, and staying silent. Give yourself 10 seconds. In those 10 seconds, you move from your animal brain to your leader brain. The voluntary hardship. Do something every day that you don't want to do. Take a cold shower. Leave your phone in another room. Walk instead of drive. Alexander refused the water to remind himself that he was a man, not a god. You must remind yourself that you are the master of your comfort, not its servant. The internal audit. At the end of the day, don't ask, "What did I achieve?" Ask, "How did I act?" Did you behave like a person you would respect? If you were your own assistant for a day, what would you have learned from watching yourself? This is the moral gymnasium. It is a place where you exercise your judgment and your will. It is not easy. It is often painful. But it is the only way to build a life that lasts. As Marcus walked back into his house to start the day, he felt a new sense of power. It wasn't the power of his title or his salary. It was the power of a man who had finally begun to own himself. He was no longer just a successful man. He was a man in training. He was building his internal wall. But as he reached for the door handle, a new thought entered his mind. Discipline is the foundation, but a wall without a purpose is just a prison. If Lycurgus provided the discipline, who would provide the wisdom? How does a leader know when to be hard and when to be soft? If you have the strength to hold a sword, you must also have the wisdom to know when to keep it in its sheath. This is the challenge of power. It is a challenge that a man named Solon would face in the streets of Athens, where he would be offered the one thing every man thinks he wants: absolute power, and find the courage to say no. The disciplined mind is the beginning, but the wise mind is what determines if that discipline will build a kingdom or a cage. To understand how to handle the weight of power without letting it crush your soul, we must look to the man who saved a city by refusing to rule it. Chapter 2. Why do wise leaders refuse absolute power? In the year 594 BC, the city of Athens was strangely quiet. It was not the quiet of a city at peace, but the heavy, stifling silence that comes before a storm breaks. If you walked through the rocky fields outside the city walls, you would see stone markers standing in the dirt. These stones were called horoi. They were debt pillars. They told the world that the land no longer belonged to the man who farmed it. It belonged to a rich moneylender in the city. Families who had lived on those farms for hundreds of years were now working as slaves on their own soil. If they couldn't grow enough grain to pay their debts, their wives and children were sold into foreign lands to cover the cost. The city was split in two. On one side were the few who owned everything. On the other side were the many who had nothing left to lose but their lives. Both sides were reaching for their swords. In the middle of this mess stood a man named Solon. He was a merchant, a poet, and a person both sides actually trusted. He wasn't the richest man, but he wasn't poor. He had spent his life traveling, seeing how other cities lived and failed. Now, the people of Athens did something desperate. They asked Solon to take total control. They offered him the title of tyrant. In those days, being a tyrant didn't always mean being a monster. It just meant having absolute power. It meant Solon could change any law, take any property, and punish anyone he wanted without asking for permission. His friends pulled him aside and laughed at his hesitation. They told him he was a fool if he didn't grab the chance. They said power was a prize that only a coward would turn down. Solon looked at the angry crowds and the greedy lenders.